What do Halo, Destroy All Humans, Space Invaders, and Add and Subtract with ALF all have in common? If you said they're all Alien video games, congratulations! It wasn't a particularly difficult question, but you nailed it.
What is this?
Space Invaders.
What do they do? Crash into your garage, eat all your food, dig up your yard?
You're in a mood.
Well, yeah, me too, because you have no idea how much ALF I consumed to put together this history of Alien video games, when what IGN was actually after was a history of Alien video games, like with a capital A.
Just doesn't make any goddamn sense.
This does make way more sense. It's just that, do you know how many ALF games there were? 8! And now I can't talk about any of them. But hey, maybe Alien and ALF are more closely related than I thought. They do both involve protecting a cat from being eaten, at least. So, let's get to it. (1979's) Alien, written by Dan O'Bannon and directed by Sir Ridley Scott, is a sci-fi masterpiece which should need little introduction. Part sci-fi, part slasher smash hit of absolutely soaring standards, Alien is broadly regarded as one of the most important and influential science fiction and horror movies ever made, and deservedly so. It's also a member of an elite list of fabulous film series that really should have stopped at just the one sequel. You know, like The Terminator, or RoboCop, or The Godfather, or Home Alone, or Shrek.
What?
Look, I've heard enough of this, and I'm asking you to pull the plug.
Mate, I've only just started. At any rate, there's not a lot that hasn't been said about 1979's Alien. What you may not know, however, is that Alien was already an established multimedia franchise well before its first theatrical sequel arrived in 1986. The history of Alien video games stretches back over 40 years, beginning with Alien for the Atari 2600 in November 1982.
What the hell is that?
The Atari 2600, home video game console from 1977, with a whopping 128 bytes of RAM. But I digress. 1982's Alien was one of the earliest ever video games based on an official movie license, an honour it was only marginally beaten to by Raiders of the Lost Ark, which also came out in November 1982 and holds the Guinness World Record as the first. Unfortunately, Alien wasn't exactly a complex or ambitious tie-in. The technical limitations of the Atari 2600 notwithstanding, it wasn't a unique one either. In fact, it was just a Pac-Man clone. Ghosts became aliens, Pac Dots became alien eggs, and power pellets became pulsars. It's pretty brazen. There is one key difference: it arms players with a limited flamethrower.
I mean, most animals retreat from fire, yes?
Yeah, but in this case, it's not a drastically effective tool to rely on. 1982's Alien was programmed by Doug Neubauer, who had previously made the well-regarded space combat sim Star Raiders. Neubauer later explained his keenness to work with Fox video games stemmed from his assumption he'd have a chance to work on all its movie licenses at the time, including Star Wars, which was previously distributed by Fox before Disney bought Lucasfilm and then bought Fox. Unfortunately for Neubauer, Fox didn't have the video game rights for Star Wars.
And there's no exclusive rights for anybody. Nobody wins.
While Neubauer traded his Star Wars aspirations for the Korean War and made a MASH game instead, Alien scuttled off to a new studio for a second game based on the original movie. 1984's Alien, from short-lived development studio Concept Software, was made for the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum, plus Amstrad the following year. It admittedly isn't much to look at, but it is a much more faithful interactive interpretation of the events of the movie. That is, this was no Pac-Man-inspired maze game. Rather, it's a menu-driven strategy game that requires players to command the crew of the Nostromo as they attempt to either eject the alien into space or trigger the Nostromo's self-destruct sequence and escape in the shuttle. Like the film, one of your team is secretly an android working to betray the rest of the crew.
It's a robot! Ash is a goddamn robot!
With the original Alien movie license under its belt and a big screen sequel just around the corner, Concept Software moved on to a completely unrelated movie license the following year.
Whatever it was big.
Oh, not at all. It was a video game adaptation of Paul McCartney's Give My Regards to Broad Street, a film the late Roger Ebert described as a non-movie. Alien moved elsewhere, again. In fact, it actually multiplied. James Cameron's action-packed and pleasingly pluralized Aliens had a pair of video game adaptations released the same year as the film. Aliens the Computer Game and Aliens the Computer Game. Yes, two different games, same name. You see, Activision had the rights to an Aliens game and developed and published one itself in the North American market. However, Activision's own UK subsidiary, Electric Dreams, had also developed its own bespoke game at the same time, which was published in European territories. They were two entirely different games. Why they both shared an identical title is anyone's guess.
They don't say why, and I don't ask. I don't ask because it takes 2 weeks to get an answer out here, and the answer is always don't ask.
Activision's US version, first released on Commodore 64 and on Apple II the following year, was a collection of 6 different minigames designed to bring certain parts of the movie alive, from steering the dropship down from the Sulaco to fending off the alien queen in the power loader. The scattergun approach didn't please everybody, but the game enjoyed a decent reception based on the standards of the time for movie tie-ins. It's Electric Dreams' UK version, however, that has the stronger legacy, and that's thanks to several important innovations. Rather than a series of conventional mini-games, the UK version of Aliens opted for a more consistent approach. The result was a first-person experience that placed us in the base down on LV-426, doing its darndest to simulate turning left and right in a 3D environment on ancient 8-bit hardware by wrapping scrolling 2D backdrops around the characters. Aliens was also one of the first team-based combat games, with players in charge of the fate of 6 characters from the film, each of whom need to be moved, managed and protected in order to make it through alive. Perhaps more than anything, though, at a time where even the most challenging games tended to top out at stressful, Aliens was outright scary.
I'm scared. Me too.
Accompanied by the chilling beeping of motion trackers, picking your way through the labyrinthine base, which was so complex it was impossible to tackle without the game's paper map, was frightening. Sure, it looks hopelessly primitive through a modern lens, but here was something that was doing justice to its blood-curdling big-screen brother. At the time of its release, the UK version garnered a heavy helping of praise as one of the best video game movie tie-ins of the 80s. To add to the confusing state of affairs, Electric Dreams released Activision's US version of Aliens the Computer Game on Commodore 64 and Spectrum in Europe anyway, which it called Aliens the Computer Game US version. But hey, it's still a better name than the next game in this list, which is 1987's Aliens Alien 2. Hey boss, you don't think we're patronising gamers by assuming they're too stupid to know Aliens is the sequel to Alien? Can't we just call it Aliens? You know, like the movie?
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
Right, well, Aliens Alien 2 was ultimately only released on MSX in Japan, and to be honest, if we're going to be talking about a side-scrolling Aliens game out of Japan, it ain't going to be this one from Square. It's going to be 1990's arcade-only smash hit, Aliens from Konami. Aliens is a grand and gory side-scrolling shooter from the golden age of arcades, and was reportedly Konami's second best-selling arcade game for 1990, right after the all-conquering Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's one that likely holds a special place in the hearts of kids who grew up cruising aisles of colourful cabinets clutching a fistful of coins, even if Konami ultimately forgot what colour Sigourney Weaver's hair was.
I don't believe this. I don't f***ing believe this.
A fast and loose riff on the final act of James Cameron's film, Aliens sees players mowing down wave upon wave of the slimy bastards as Ripley strides through the infested base. A second player can even tag along as Hicks. Konami saw fit to invent a number of new alien types for the game too, which kept things varied up until Ripley's inevitable showdown with the Queen. Of course, getting there was no cakewalk, as Aliens was tough. Not as hard to crack as Contra perhaps, but certainly unafraid to overwhelm players long before the credits roll and their pockets are already empty.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Meanwhile, the Alien film series scurried back into cinemas in 1992 with Alien 3, the poster for which famously promised 3 times the suspense, 3 times the danger, and 3 times the terror. It also promised at least 3 times the salary for Sigourney Weaver by all reports. Unfortunately, the end result was shonky enough for director David Fincher to completely disown the whole thing, and James Cameron later declared the decision to immediately kill off everyone but Ripley was a slap in the face to fans of the previous film, entirely undermining everything that happened in Aliens. Good thing Cameron learned to never make such an infuriating, franchise-derailing, mean-spirited mistake himself. Anyway, regardless of whether or not the Alien series should have kept going, it did, and so did the games. Alien 3's first movie tie-in, most versions of which were from Probe Software, came to essentially every platform available at the time, including Mega Drive or Genesis depending on where you grew up, all the way back to the Commodore 64, which was a decade old at that time. Game Boy, Game Gear, NES, Super NES, you name it, Alien 3 was on it. While there were a range of differences across platforms, each basically boiled down to navigating Ripley through the prison colony that featured in the film, liberating inmates and liquidating aliens. They also all shared punishing time limits on completing the levels.
We don't have a lot of time, okay?
Yeah, I'm aware of that. In addition to this home console 2D platformer, Sega published an unrelated Alien 3 arcade rail shooter in 1993, which, in the spirit of badly named Alien games, was called Alien 3 The Gun. It's an absolutely terrible name, but the game does totally ignore the plot of the movie, which is what I've also done since the 90s, so I'll salute it for that. Alien 3 The Gun brushes aside almost every element of Alien 3 The Movie, opting instead for a threadbare story about 2 Colonial Marines responding to an SOS beacon from the Sulaco, crashing on the Fiorina 161 prison planet, and blasting wave after wave of aliens to bits. We are, of course, talking about a light gun game designed to be played in several minute bursts when the line for NBA Jam is too long, so it's fair not to expect too much. But with 2 hefty M41A pulse rifles perched on the front, it was certainly the closest you could come to immersing yourself and a friend into the world of Alien and experience the frantic firefights firsthand. 1993 also saw the arrival of Alien vs Predator on Super NES, developed by Japanese studio Joridan, which stopped making video games some time ago and now operates a public transit planning website.
You know, that's very interesting, but it doesn't really get us anywhere, does it?
Well, actually, I think that's exactly what it does. But yes, we should move on because this may take a little explaining. Aliens vs Predator is a series that began as a Dark Horse comic book short story in 1989, before expanding into its own limited series in 1990, and subsequently into a fully fledged multimedia franchise of its own. Technically speaking, Aliens vs Predator is an entirely adjacent series to Alien, and while there's been definite synergy between AVP and the Predator series, and it's been established these particular xenomorphs do exist within the Predator universe, AVP has never been acknowledged in Alien. In fact, the most recent Alien movies have been fiercely contradictory to AVP lore. As such, we should probably ignore the AVP series in this history of Alien games.
What do you mean we?
Well, like I said, AVP is essentially its own thing, so I don't know whether purists will...
I won't stand for it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Joridan's Super NES Alien vs Predator beat-em-up wasn't a particularly good game, nor was the charmless Alien vs Predator The Last of His Clan for Game Boy, released the same year. The lukewarm reception of the former meant its planned Sega and PC ports were abandoned, and a direct Atari Jaguar port was also binned after Atari brought on UK developer Rebellion, otherwise best known for its Sniper Elite series, to create a bespoke Alien vs Predator first-person shooter instead. 1994's Alien vs Predator for the Jaguar, which took a heavy dose of inspiration from Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, is generally regarded as one of the greatest games ever released on Atari's ill-fated final console, although that admittedly is a sadly small list. Alien vs Predator on Jaguar allows players to battle as an alien, a predator, or a human colonial marine, each of whom have different abilities. Aliens, for instance, can use air ducts to move around the levels, and while they can't heal, they can respawn and continue from cocooned people they impregnate along their path. In the meantime, in 1994, Capcom also released its own Alien vs Predator game, an arcade-only beat-em-up completely unrelated to Joridan's Super NES version from 1993. It's one of the best-looking 16-bit beat-em-ups ever made, and certainly one of the most esteemed of its era. Okay, so do you want me to go through the rest of the AVP games now or later?
Come on, do it now!
Fine, well, Rebellion had another crack at the series with 1999's Aliens vs. Predator for PC, which rescued the spirit of the original from being forever marooned on a defunct console. 1999's Aliens vs. Predator again featured 3 campaigns, and while its multiplayer copped some criticism for balance issues, its superb single-player component saw it snag a reputation as one of the strongest sci-fi shooters of its era. The series continued in 2001 with Aliens vs. Predator 2, again on PC, but this time with No One Lives Forever and Fear studio Monolith Productions at the helm. Here, the campaigns for both the titular creatures and the Colonial Marines actually crossed over. It garnered strong praise, although its 2002 expansion Primal Hunt was less warmly received. After the underwhelming 2003 Xbox and PS2 RTS Aliens vs. Predator Extinction, plus a string of forgotten mobile and web games, Rebellion returned to its lead role behind this series. First with 2007's Aliens vs. Predator Requiem on PSP, a dud third-person action game where you only play as Predator, and later with 2010's Aliens vs. Predator Reboot for Xbox 360, PS3 and PC. The Aliens vs. Predator Reboot followed the same template that had served the series well in the past, with a campaign for each of the 3 featured species, but while it nailed the atmosphere and dialed up the gore, it was disappointing elsewhere. But while that's a wrap for the AVP games to date, we'll need to do an about-face to return to the Alien series.
I am not going back.
Well, we have to, because we've skipped over a whole bunch of them. 1995 saw the release of Aliens: A Comic Book Adventure, a below-par point-and-click game from Mindscape, starring a spaceship commander who we're supposed to believe doesn't have an elevator keycard for his own vessel. Mindscape's gambit to license the property directly from Dark Horse Comics rather than Fox didn't work, as it turns out that in space, everyone can still hear you scheme. Fox cracked down immediately and sank any further production beyond the initial stock of the game, and Mindscape weren't able to finish other language localizations.
Can I finish?
No, there's no way.
Around the same time, Fox partnered with Probe for the first-person shooter Alien Trilogy, which came to PlayStation, Saturn and PC in early 1996. Acclaim picked up publishing after acquiring Probe in late 1995. An extremely loose riff on the films, of which there were only 3 at the time, Alien Trilogy arrived right in the heart of the era where first-person shooters were still far more commonly referred to as Doom clones. The moniker wasn't always applied as a pejorative though, and on PlayStation in particular, Alien Trilogy became a strong seller that received praise for its atmospheric take on the Alien universe, which was bolstered with sound effects lifted straight from the films. Alien Trilogy was actually one of 2 Fox film adaptations from Probe in 1996 alone. A separate Probe team was simultaneously building Die Hard Trilogy, published under a pre-existing deal with EA later the very same year.
NYPD!
And hey, since Die Hard is in the same universe as Commando, and depending on who you ask, Predator may be in the same universe as Commando, you know what that could mean.
Wait for the sky cap?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
1998 saw the arrival of MMO FPS Aliens Online, a completely extinct multiplayer shooter from the dial-up days that's not possible to show you in action today.
I'm not making that out too well. What is it, Hudson?
You tell me, man. I only work here.
It doesn't matter what it is, Mum wants to use the phone, so you have to get off the internet. Aliens Online was available for just 2 years on the short-lived GameStorm online gaming service before EA pulled the plug in mid-2000 after it acquired the platform.
How could they cut the power, man?
That's Corpos for you, Hudson. In 2000, the long-gestating PlayStation 1 exclusive Alien Resurrection finally arrived, albeit shortly after the debut of the PlayStation 2. Alien Resurrection had been intended to ship alongside the 1997 movie, but multiple iterations of the game had floundered in development hell at Argonaut Games for several years. Following the release of Argonaut's Alien Odyssey, which, for clarity, was an Alien game, but it wasn't an Alien game, work on Alien Resurrection began in 1996. Initially conceived as a top-down shooter, Argonaut restarted development in late 1996, opting for a more cutting-edge approach inspired by the likes of Tomb Raider, but then pivoted again to a first-person shooter in late 1998 after it had become evident that third-person shooter view simply wasn't working. Unfortunately, while Argonaut had eventually found the right formula after 4 years of development, and the game was surprisingly more decent than the movie it shared a name with, Alien Resurrection failed to find a large audience. Its punishing difficulty could have certainly played a part, but the simpler explanation is probably the fact that there wasn't much of an appetite for a game based on the least successful Alien movie to date, 3 years after it hit cinemas. In an odd twist, upon its release, Alien Resurrection copped significant critical flack for its default dual analog control system, where the left stick controls your movement and the right stick handles turning and looking up and down.
Does that compute? Or do I have to draw you a schematic?
You might recognize this control solution from every first-person shooter made this century, but back in 2000, Alien Resurrection was hugely ahead of its time, and certainly part of an elite squad of shooters that pioneered modern console FPS controls before Halo swept in and took all the credit. It wasn't quite the first though, despite what you may have heard. 1999's Medal of Honor features modern dual analog controls as one of its preset configurations, and GoldenEye on N64 features them too, if you choose the mode that uses a separate controller in each hand, although you do need to swap right for left after the fact.
Well, that's the Switch.
Yeah, I guess it is like Switch Joy-Cons this way. Good point. Speaking of Nintendo, 2001 saw the release of Aliens Thanatos Encounter from Wicked Witch Software, a top-down shooter that was exclusive to Game Boy Color, so it's invariably a lot more primitive than its PC and console peers of the time, although positively bleeding edge compared with 2003's Aliens Unleashed for mobile. In 2006, the series returned to arcades with the light gun shooter Aliens Extermination from big buck hunter developer Play Mechanics, before sneaking back onto a Nintendo handheld again in 2011 with Aliens Infestation for DS from WayForward Technologies. Primarily inspired by James Cameron's Aliens, Aliens Infestation was a well-received Metroidvania spin on Aliens, and with its beautiful hand-drawn 2D art and a set of levels that took players back to the Sulaco and LV-426, it was an authentically old-school Alien game. Its interesting hook was permadeath for its cast of characters, and specific dialogue for each. Just like the movies, the idea was for you to become attached to certain characters within your party before they were killed in your particular playthrough. Aliens Infestation was developed in tandem with Gearbox and Sega's Aliens Colonial Marines, although the latter didn't emerge from its cocoon until 2013. With performances from Alien stars Lance Hendrickson and Michael Biehn, whose death in Alien 3 was retconned from the timeline, Aliens Colonial Marines was pitched as a new direct sequel story to Aliens. Influential sci-fi concept artist Sid Mead, famous for his work on Blade Runner, Tron and Aliens itself, was even brought on to ensure the world of Aliens Colonial Marines perfectly matched the film upon which it picks up from. Unfortunately, after a lengthy and clearly rocky gestation of around 6 years, matching the Aliens aesthetic is about all it managed.
That could have been better.
Yeah, you're telling us. Bafflingly unrefined considering its development period, Aliens Colonial Marines also misses the entire point of Aliens by turning what is supposed to be the most lethal lifeforms in the galaxy into pulse rifle fodder for a routine run-and-gun shooter. The only scary thing in its 6-hour campaign was its startlingly spotty understanding of the facts of Aliens. That is, why does it take the crew of Aliens Colonial Marines 17 weeks to reach LV-426 after receiving Hicks's distress call, after Hicks clearly explained during Aliens that they could expect a rescue team to arrive after 17 days, even without sending a distress call?
17 days? Hey man, I don't want to rain on your parade. We're not going to last 17 hours.
Yeah, 17 doesn't feel like a coincidence. That feels like a mistake. Of course, that's nothing compared to the fact Hadley's Hope itself is still standing after the explosion of the atmosphere processing plant that vaporized everything within a 30-kilometer radius. Interestingly, Aliens was not the only film license Gearbox had up its sleeve at the time. It also had the license to Michael Mann's 1995 all-timer Heat. speaking as someone who respectfully likes Heat even more than Aliens, I think we dodged a bullet here. I don't much want to play a Heat game on par with Aliens Colonial Marines.
I don't much want to either. Neither do I.
Sega would earn some redemption the following year, not with 2014's Aliens Armageddon, which was an arcade-only follow-up to Aliens Extermination, again developed by Play Mechanics, but rather with the sneaky and survival horror-themed Alien Isolation. Set 15 years after the events of the original Alien, Alien Isolation casts players as Ripley's daughter Amanda, whose quest for closure concerning her mother's disappearance drags her into her very own close encounter of the worst kind. Inspired primarily by the original rather than its action-heavy sequel, Isolation is built around stealth rather than slaughter. Evading the bloodthirsty alien randomly stalking the space station Sevastopol is your only option, and the anxiety that Isolation elicits has proved to develop a Creative Assembly, a studio otherwise largely famous for its Total War strategy series, genuinely understood the terrifying spirit of the film world it was allowed to recreate. Alien Isolation's trial and error terror may get a little exhausting at times, but it really is a licensed movie game of uncommon quality.
Give me a demo.
A demo? What, stuck to the front of a gaming magazine? As much as it pains me to concede, I think those days are sadly well behind us. But, as hard as it may be to believe, Alien Isolation really is a movie license done right. Hell, the original cast of the 1979 film even returned to reprise their roles in pre-order DLC for Isolation, including Tom Skerritt, Veronica Cartwright, Harry Dean Stanton, Yaphet Kotto, and yes, Sigourney Weaver herself.
Alright, I'm in.
Following Alien Isolation, there are only a few more games to note. In 2016, an alien appeared as a guest character in Mortal Kombat X. Alien Blackout was a mobile-only Five Nights at Freddy's clone released in 2019, also starring Amanda Ripley, but it was delisted in 2023. In 2021, Ripley and an alien appeared as another pair of absurdly expensive character skins in Fortnite, the game that normalized DLC being so overpriced you can buy an entire video game for the price of 1 or 2 character models.
It's really sad. It's pathetic.
Tell me about it. Anyway, Aliens Fireteam Elite also came out in 2021, which is a 3-player co-op third-person shooter from Cold Iron Studios, set a couple of decades after the end of Alien 3. In stark contrast to Alien Isolation, Fireteam Elite is a return to gunslinging and painting the walls with alien goo. But for a game with modest aspirations, it certainly had a more convincing crack at it than Colonial Marines. 2023's Aliens Dark Descent from Tinderloss Interactive is a curious mashup of isometric squad-based RTS action with genuine survival horror elements. But it's a combo that works surprisingly well, and an admirably unique concept amongst a series of games that date back 40 years. All we need now is an Aliens comedy. No, I don't mean comedy of errors, I mean something funny.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
In late 2023, an alien and a distinctly off-brand Ripley also debuted as licensed guest characters in the asymmetric multiplayer horror game Dead by Daylight, joining a swarm of slasher movie superstars from Scream, Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and many more. But other than Alien Rogue Incursion, a single-player action horror VR game with an otherwise unspecified 2024 release date, that about covers it.
Not bad for a human.
Well, I am doing my best here. In the meantime, if you haven't already, check out the trailer for Fede Alvarez's Alien Romulus. But if that's too scary for you, rest assured you can stick with IGN for everything else too. Besides, if the world of Alien is too much to take, you aren't alone.
This from the same person who watched the movie Aliens from under the couch?
Hey, I thought I owed one of those guys money.